The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. Now, I'm saying good morning, good evening, and good afternoon because we have over 100 people listening at the moment, and from about 9 or 10 countries, I believe. So it's wonderful to have you all here. Obviously, situational agility is raising a lot of interest across the globe, and I'm delighted that I can bring you this webinar that we can look into the topic of situational agility with more insights. I'm Jenny Bailey from the Agile Business Consortium. We're the not-for-profit member organisation who are leading, promoting, enabling business agility worldwide. Now, just to give you a little bit of housekeeping before we get started, and I welcome my guest today, as with all our webinars, we're recording this broadcast, so everyone who's registered will receive this in a follow-up email. We're happy to take questions. That's no problem at all. So please feel free to type your questions in the box, and I will try to take as many as I can and integrate them throughout the presentation. And also, there'll be an opportunity at the end of the webinar for further questions if time permits. Also, if your feedback is obviously extremely important to us, so please do get in touch. And my email is just there. So it's jenny@agilebusiness.org. Not a problem. Get in contact with us and let us know your feedback. So I'm joined today by Fatimah Abbouchi, who is the Managing Director of Agile Management Office in Melbourne, Australia. We both wanted to bring you this webinar on the topic of situational agility because we both felt that it was very relevant, not only in the current climate, but also for the understanding of agility. Now, whether you see Agile with a big A or a little a, agility in Agile is changing the way we do business. It's changing our interactions and it's making a big impact on the bottom line. As with all things, there are right ways and wrong ways, and our discussion today will hopefully bring about further changes as we identify some of the right paths with agility. It's not prescriptive, as we all know, and we do need to break these silos. So I'm delighted that Fatimah can join us now and give us some of her insights into this. So welcome, Fatimah, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and welcome to everybody today on the webinar. It's so exciting to have you all here, especially from all the different countries. It's really great to be part of this webinar, in particular because I feel that myself and a lot of people see the Agile Business Consortium as a source of truth. They've been around since 1994. And the Agile Manifesto, as it stands, came out in 2001. So they really are at the forefront of Agile. So I'm really excited to be part of this Agile community to talk about this topic in more detail.
Well, thank you for saying that. We appreciate that. That's fantastic. And all a source of truth and all very true, exactly what you said. Yes, we've been going now. We're celebrating actually 25 years this year. And obviously the manifesto was signed in 2001 and our signatory was Ari van Bennekom. And I know he's touring the world talking about it, and he refers to it as a very big party that's grown and that's got bigger and bigger. So thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful. It's lovely to have you joining us for this webinar. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Beautiful. So I've been in this space now for about 16 years. I'm spending a lot of time across projects and PMO across a different number of organisations, 22 different companies, 15 different industries, spending time on projects and portfolios up to $1 billion across 16 different countries worldwide. Both Agile, waterfall approaches, all different methodologies and experiences in this area. And so I've had the privilege, in particular, heavily over the last 3 to 5 years, in spending a lot more time in the Agile space and actually gaining further insights from clients themselves by being on site with them, and also through some of the research and articles that we collect information from. So as part of my work in this space, I'm really fortunate to be able to share more about Agile through podcasts and articles, etc., and do a lot of work with our business as well. So in my spare time, I am a mental health ambassador with the biggest not-for-profit mental health organisation in Australia, and it's one of the things I absolutely love to do, second to the PMO and Agile space as well.
Wow, you sound an extremely busy lady.
Yes, it's all great fun. So let's get into it, why don't we? So in today's webinar, we're going to kind of break up into 4 key areas, and I think that this will enable us to go from understanding the problems with being prescriptive understanding how we define situational agility, which is relatively new for some people in terms of the term, applying it in organisations and where that has maybe not gone so right, and also learning from others as well. In today's webinar, we've actually got a guest speaker who will join us later on today to actually share a case study through an experience around design thinking, agile and delivery, and share some of those insights in that case study, which will be also sent out after the webinar as well.
Okay, sounds good. Let's crack on with it.
So when we think about prescriptive and being prescriptive and the problem with being prescriptive, there are a lot of frameworks that exist out there. And I think that many of you on the call are either familiar with it through the organisations you are working with, or perhaps you are in the early days of getting on the Agile train, so to speak. There are a lot of different frameworks that are popping up that have very prescriptive ways of applying them. And I think the way that we need to think about this is, although there are aspects of the frameworks that may be prescriptive, we need to really think about some of those principles and the ceremonies, for example, where they don't necessarily need to be prescriptive. So, for example, there are frameworks out there that might have certain attributes that apply to your situation, but there in fact may be others that don't apply. And I think sometimes there is some confusion, definitely in organisations, where they may feel that there are certain frameworks that need to be followed completely, and that in fact causes problems. We're going to discuss a little bit further shortly. And I think also the other aspect of being prescriptive is we assume that everyone in an organisation is on the same page. Now, with organisations being predominantly silo-driven in many instances, it's hard to get alignment on some of the basics when it comes to, standard governance and delivery methods and practices, let alone changing the way the whole organisation runs to a new way of working. Now, not saying that it can't be done, it definitely can be, and in some instances there are success stories, but trying to be prescriptive with the way we change, with the way that we go to a new way of working may in fact not be suitable for one organisation the way that it is to others. And that is because there are very different characteristics within these organisations, and applications of Agile need to be thought about in a different way for each of those organisations. If I give you an example, think about the way stand-up. Stand-up is a ceremony of Agile that, I'm hearing about every single day. All these organisations are running stand-ups, whether they are running Agile in their delivery space or whether they're running waterfall, they are in fact using stand-ups. Now that's a great concept, and I think that it does work in a lot of instances. The concept might be prescriptive, but the way you execute a stand-up in your organisation or in your team may actually not be prescriptive. So if you think about remote working teams themselves may not be able to be in the same place at the same time of a stand-up. So there needs to be a situational based application of that particular ceremony in order to benefit that team. So there are different ways and different aspects that need to be applied that suit the organisation and the situation that you're in. The other thing we need to think about when we look at problems is implementing Agile in the exact same way across every organisation is not situational. It's effectively using a cookie cutter cut and paste model, which isn't effective because it will lead to failure. Trying to apply the same thing in one organisation over another may not in fact be the right thing to do. And I'm going to talk through some examples of how that may not work and talk you through how that hasn't worked in some organisations. When we think about problems, there is a number of different ones, and I just wanted to talk through a few of those. And I think that with Agile itself, for some people and for some organisations, it's still very early in terms of infancy. The infancy of understanding and the infancy around how it's applied. Now, there are some organisations out there, and Jenny, you probably know many of them, where they may be well ahead of the curve and they may have implemented Agile in amazing ways, and their maturity overall might be much stronger. But in some organisations, the understanding around what Agile means is still very early. And so trying to help these organisations understand how Agile is going to be applied, it needs to be understood well. Even in delivery space, when we think about typical project management and delivery, sometimes it takes a long time to get operational teams understanding and aware of what the projects are trying to deliver, for example. And likewise, project delivery teams need the time and understanding of how the operational environments work, because they both often run very separately, although there is interactions between them. So if we're trying to get other parts of the organisation, other silos within the organisation to understand this new way of working, we really need to bring them on that journey and ensure we're all drinking from the same fountain to minimise misunderstandings.
And Fatima, can I just ask that this is your experience? You've got a lot of organisations out there that aren't quite understanding Agile, that aren't quite, they're doing their dailies, they're looking into it, but they're sort of missing a trick there. Would you say? Is that from your experience?
Absolutely. And I think that through what I've seen predominantly in the last, say, 3 years, many of the Agile transformations that have taken place in organisations across a number of industries has really been a top-down directive. One company I spoke with in the last 3 months has said that they're going Agile because they want to do things faster. Right. But not really understanding what does faster mean and what are they comparing it to when they look at how they're delivering today. So I think there's a lot about the theory side that looks really good in principle, but I think the application of it is something that organisations really need to think about, because we all know practical application is different to the theory itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it, though, is the culture as well. I mean, we've got to talk about the culture, because you can't necessarily apply Agile without getting the culture and the leadership and the governance and all the other elements of it correct. And from some of our experiences over here with organisations, it's the mindset, isn't it? That's the sticky point, if you like, and getting everybody to cohesively work together, in cross-functional teams.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of time wasted in terms of debating, and I'm seeing this quite regularly, debating what it is to be Agile or to do Agile, to apply Agile, what frameworks we're using, etc., etc. But I think it's often forgotten the cultural side of it and how we work together, which underpins, going down that journey. It's often second to, bringing in trainers and Agile coaches and rolling that out first before actually thinking about those aspects. And I think there's definitely some way to go in the organisation space to actually enable them to be successful, to utilise their other steps ahead by understanding what the vision is for these Agile transformations, and not assuming that applying Agile in a way that worked for company X is going to work for company Y, because they are completely different organisations, different levels of maturity, even delivery maturity, different people in these teams as well that may or may not have exposure to this type of working. There's a lot of characteristics that I think we need to look at as well, and I think it's happening here. And I know, Jenny, you've mentioned that it's appeared often as well in the UK space for the people you've been speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one thing that we're passionate about here at the Agile Business Consortium. It's really letting people understand Agile and business agility and the benefits. But it's not just getting them to understand it. It's implementing it. It's doing the transformations. It's guiding them and assisting them in every way we can. Because the last thing we want is for Agile to get a bad name. If everybody's out there and there's racing towards their goalposts, then I can see, that there could be a problem when it comes to it, because if people experience Agile and they experience it wrongly, it doesn't make those great benefits that everyone's saying about it, then it's going to get into problems. And so really the consortium is very passionate, as I said, about really allowing people those insights and that understanding that is paramount really in actually applying Agile the right way. But there are so many elements to it. It's not like one size fits all as well. Like we're saying, it's not prescriptive in any way, shape or form. I mean, Ari van Bennekom, for instance, he was on a LinkedIn post yesterday in a video, and he was saying instead of everyone calling them daily stand-ups, he was just calling them dailies. It doesn't matter what you look at in Agile, there's always a daily in it, for instance. And like you say, it all depends on the application of how you actually do that and your structure that you put around it. So Agile is an amalgamation of so much things that need to come together for everybody to work cohesively. for the end result. So it's not a switch that you can turn. It's definitely a journey, and it seems like there's a bit of a fear in Australia to get on this path and get on this journey as fast as possible, and go straight for the finishing line. So we need to kind of pull people back, I think, a little bit, and just say, you know, that there is a process, there is a way, and it's okay. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, to your point, there is a lot of conversations that have happened, you know, that I've been involved in, and others in the in my network and in the actual industry, that my peers, for example, where there are many of them that are understanding that it needs to be applied in an iterative way, actually implementing Agile in a way that suits the organisation at pace with the organisation. Often I think that the trouble happens when Agile is thought about as a delivery only space, and actually the rest of the organisation gets left behind. But as we know, it's about business agility and organisation-wide change, and I think the way that it's applied iteratively is going to be really important, and we need to do so in a collaborative way to ensure that people are not change fatigued beyond what they already are, but also understanding and able to apply the learnings that they are getting throughout that process of learning and awareness of what Agile is and what it means to them. And I think that's kind of being forgotten, and I think it's leaving the door open for error with application, and like you said, getting a bad rap because people are not understanding. If they don't understand, then they can't, you know, manage the risk around it, and also their own learnings.
Sure, absolutely. Okay.
Beautiful. So when we think about, you know, frameworks, as I said, there's many frameworks out there. We're not going to be talking about that today. But, you know, prescriptive framework is one thing. It's practical execution of it that I think that organisations need to take and think about. We need to think about how we selectively implement aspects of Agile that work for the situation that we are in at the time. We need to think about how it's going to work with your current environment. A lot of organisations are trying to run before they can walk, assuming that implementing a new way of working is going to solve for existing problems. Now, you know, coming from the governance space myself, I've seen a lot of organisations who have underlying problems in their existing delivery areas, and the problems are not just in delivery, but focusing on delivery for a moment, where usually the application of Agile enters. You know, it might be a directive from a CIO, for example, seeing a lot of CIOs bringing in Agile. Sometimes it comes from the top down, and the CEO is the one who recommends the change. But either way, thinking about how you can selectively implement and practically apply it to your situation rather than taking it as gospel is really important. Like any methodology, Agile has a multitude of principles, processes, tools that make it what it is today. And I think that we need to think about what is the practical application of that for the situation that we are in. Don't worry about what Mary and Joe are doing at company X and you know, what you're previously seen at another company. Every company's maturity levels is different, and so we really need to think about that when we try to introduce Agile. Otherwise, we're going to face additional challenges and probably spend forever arguing about what it is, what it isn't, and what it should be.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about situational agility. There's many differences between being Agile, doing Agile, and applying Agile. And I'm almost positive that if we have this conversation, and I speak to some of you on the line now, you probably will have a different answer for what the differences between those are. But let's discuss what Agile really means and how situational agility applies. If you think about situational agility, it means being adaptable to the situation at hand, being flexible, being able to work dynamically within the organisation to implement change that fits within the organisation and behavioural profile and the current situation that you're in. It's about being able to implement in short-term for long-term gains. It's about being collaborative and bringing others outside your silo into that journey. And it's also about understanding what it really means to be Agile. And understanding what it means to be Agile usually is referred to in some instances big A Agile and small a Agile. Now, for many of you, you probably are familiar with both, if not one or the other. Now, big A Agile versus small A Agile, often I'm seeing a lot of organisations, in particular from the region I'm in, who are going out and trying to implement many of the big A Agile initiatives into their organisation. And I think that for most of you, including Jenny, who you live and breathe Agile every single day, that there's a lot of assumptions that are made around big A Agile, rather than thinking about maybe the small A Agile, which is also equally as important when trying to implement Agile. Would you say?
Absolutely, very much so. Yeah.
So almost every client that I've personally seen, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this in the organisations you are in, I've had an open dialogue with them about that, to actually understand a little bit more about, you know, what frameworks and methods they're using and what ways that they are delivering. And I think that sometimes the ways of working involves not only the big A Agile, but the small A Agile, and how you actually apply that is going to be really critical in order for you to embed the change longer term. As I said, doing some training and then expecting your teams to just get it will not suffice in order for you to embed Agile change and the Agile principles. It's actually about trying to find ways to embed Agile principles in your organisation and applying them in an open and a transparent way, so that you can ensure that not only focusing on big A Agile, but actually focusing on small A Agile. Doing so will enable you to focus your efforts on bringing together the organisation and all the other areas outside your immediate silos, because it will enable you to drive greater business agility. Because when we understand what we're trying to do, we implement and focus on the small A Agile, which is back to that culture aspects of it, we're actually going to be able to be more transparent, more open, and actually make smarter decisions around how, in fact, that we are going to take this journey forward. Smart organisations understand this, and the smart organisations that are in the midst of their Agile transformations, or maybe at the starting phases, are really, really clear that it's the small A Agile before big A Agile. And that's so critical in order to get the change that you were looking for.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a very clear message. It's about that mindset and the application.
And I think when we look at one of the challenges that is very common, and I think this is common irrelevant of whether we're talking about, you know, a delivery function or other functions within an organisation, we still, as organisations, struggle with cutting through the verticals. When you think about delivery, delivery is very horizontal across an organisation. But then when we think about the way that organisations mostly are set up, they're running very silos. So Agile is an opportunity, in particular the small A Agile attributes, to bring that organisation, cut through the verticals and bring them on that journey, on that horizontal journey from the start of an organisation at your C level all the way into operations. And I think that one of the common misunderstandings in terms of Agile management is people will often see it as a technology solution, or you know, it's made for software development only. And although there might be some truth to that from when it's you know, it came into being with the manifesto, it's actually an approach to running an organisation. And I think people often forget that. So I think, you know, I know, Jenny, you probably would agree with that point around, you know, just because it's maybe started in the software development space, it's definitely gone far away from there in these days.
Oh, absolutely. A huge amount. I mean, yeah, the software was where it was embedded, where it started, but the expansion of growth and the success of Agile has obviously taken it much out of, well, it's still in the IT world as well, very much so, but it's expanded now also into the business, into whole transformation. So, yeah, absolutely.
And I think one of the things that I'm seeing here as well, and speaking to a number of different clients, that often the change, you know, might have started coming from the IT space, but now we're seeing actually Agile implementation and transformations being led by the CEO at all their level, and it's more of a top-down approach. And I think one of the things that some companies might be getting wrong is having that top-down approach is all well and good, but we also need to marry that up with the bottom-up look at things as well. And I think that's where people within their teams and then team leaders and managers and some of the people, you know, in this webinar can take away and think about how they marry up, you know, the top-down view of the organisation and what the CEO is, you know, trying to drive, and then bridging the gaps to align that to the bottom up as well. So we can look at things in a more holistic way. We can look at things end to end and look at ways to solve complex problems that enables us to continuously collaborate to solve for those. So for example, in the governance space, which is the space that I spend most of my time in, there is a lot of challenges around how delivery teams in certain functions work with non-delivery teams. There is disconnect with the way delivery teams interact with, say, group finance or internal audit or group human resource functions, etc. And so what we've done is we've used some of the Agile principles, and we've actually created a working group to bring those parties together iteratively as needed to solve complex problems that's actually causing pain for either the delivery side or maybe causing pain for the operational side. And I think bringing those teams together ad hoc as needed is a really important and smart way to actually cross-collaborate to find ways to solve and actually to build on the journey going forward. And I think that that's something I've seen work quite well, where you actually allow non-delivery and delivery teams to feel that they are involved and actually taking their insight and actually planning together what the future is going to look like. Doing so enables them to co-design.
Absolutely. I think that's a vital thing to do. And also that's very situational agility, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we just need to really just ask the question. I mean, rather than spending time, waiting and creating reports that you have to wait a month for a report to go up to a steering committee or an executive board, whatever it might be, let's have the conversations now. Let's start trying to create new ways of working together that utilizes Agile principles like the stand-up, for example, like other ceremonial activities to actually enable us to communicate more frequently and more collaboratively. So let's move into applying situational agility, and I think in this section, it really goes back to one of the #1 points, which Jenny, you mentioned earlier, around improving culture. There is a lot of theory out there around how we improve culture, and I'm sure that many of us are familiar with that. But I think it's the practical application of how we embed new ways of working, but also new ways of behaving to enable organisations to improve their culture. In some organisations, there is a really non-transparent approach in some areas. For example, in the PMO space, where I'm used to being, there is often no visibility on what that function is doing at any point in time. So there's already a blocker and the transparency is not there in a lot of these functions. So that's an example of where we can actually change the culture within that team by being more open and transparent with our peers in the delivery space to create a better culture for the organisation. And that pays back in dividends as well. I think also in this space, we need to think about how we can do so in a more proactive way, rather than trying to wait and see what happens. Let's be more proactive in the way that we adapt and change the way that we work today so that we can be situationally aware in the way that we do things. If we start in our teams, even if your team is one small team of 5 people or 10 people, you can actually start implementing new behaviours that helps to improve your organisation's culture. And as other parts of the organisation see that, they're no doubt going to leverage from that. And one example would be a banking client that I've worked with in the past who started implementing Agile specifically for their digital team. Doing so in a way that suited the governance requirements, the way that the delivery teams work together, the remote working of those teams, all the different aspects were considered and well thought out at the beginning. We did this in a way that enabled us to understand how we would apply Agile in doses, incrementally, but at the same time taking stock to understand whether the learnings that were being trained and rolled out were being understood. Because people within this space were actually able to apply those learnings immediately the next day. And so they did that in this organisation quite successfully. And it was taking that as a practical and real life scenario that then they used as a case study to get buy-in from the top to roll that out across the company. So starting small And embracing agility in a section or a department or a function of an organisation can actually be quite powerful. We do that in the PMO space all the time. When we have Kanban rules, for example, we're very transparent in the way that things are run. So there's a lot of principles we can use today to start becoming situationally agile.
Yeah, some really good points.
Yeah, and I think Jenny, to your point also around culture, you probably would agree. There's a lot of theory out there, but the practical application of it is a whole nother story.
Absolutely.
I think the culture as well directly links to clarity and vision. And I think if organisations have clear clarity and vision around what they're trying to achieve, and they communicate that in a way that makes sense for that specific organisation, then we're able to help those that are coming on that journey to understand what's needed from them as individuals and their teams to actually apply that change. At the end of the day, everything that we're doing in organisations is back down to people. And if people are going to love or hate what is going on around them, they will help make or break an organisation in the way that it approaches the application of Agile. Unfortunately, in some examples, there has been application of Agile in a way that has not really taken stock of what the existing teams are doing. And some organisations have actually lost a lot of good talent. They've lost a lot of good knowledge and IP through the changes in resourcing, because the approach to applying Agile was very top down and there was no thinking about the bottom up. So I think that in order to change the behaviours, the processes, etc., we really need to have that marriage between top and bottom. And I think that we can all start doing that in our immediate teams as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And also, I think that's where change management comes in right at the start, doesn't it? We can't leave change management to the end because, like you say, it's fundamentally all about people, communication, and change management helps that process. I guess we're talking here at scale. I mean, this is like large organisations, but also it's something to consider, isn't it? It really is. Once you're looking to obviously transform an organisation and business agility, you really have to, it's all about the people and you have to look after your people.
Absolutely. And you need to, going back to the change management aspect, in order to create an appetite for change, you need to make your people feel involved. So people that are not involved need to have the opportunity to have a say. And I think that there is some really good things happening in this space with some clients where they're, offering mentoring and coaching and creating really good feedback loops. What's working, what's not working. We need to try something else. And how we can actually work as one, and doing so in a way that you actually co-design what that's going to look like. It will help people to be driven and motivated to actually go forward on this journey, especially if they have a role to play. And I think we also need to take into consideration, in order to enable these changes, to think about the difference between the strategy side and the tactical side, and there's both of these what they're happening in parallel. And so I think some concentration and thought about that would be really important to enable an organisation to apply and become situationally agile in a way that is going to work longer term as well. So I would say that. And the only other thing I would add as well is, how do you currently measure benefits and agility? Now, this is a topic that could be its own webinar, but measuring benefits and agility, you need to have a baseline for that. And every organisation's baseline and approach to measuring that may be different. And so I think that in order to understand whether the application and the change has been beneficial and is being beneficial, we need to think about what measurements techniques are being put in place so that you can actually measure the success as you go along.
Absolutely. Okay.
So working out what works for you, as I said, starting with people, you need to think about what's going to work for your organisation. Number of organisations have gone and tried to cookie cutter, copy, whatever you want to call it, what has happened in other organisations, even outside their industry. And there is clear evidence of that actually not working. It's quite disruptive. We're trying to apply something that worked in another organisation and assuming it's going to work the same way. I think that larger organisations have more ingrained hierarchies and more ingrained behaviours perhaps. Small to medium organisations might be able to influence change in a shorter time frame. But as you mentioned earlier, Jenny, the Agile application it's not a race. It's actually a journey, and it's never ending. It will continue to go and you'll continue to transform. you'll continue to grow, you'll continue to evolve and adapt to the situation that you're in, the culture that you're in, and the environment of your organisation. So I think it's a continuous collaboration, continuing to learn, making sure that you're taking the lessons that you're learning along that journey, making sure they're documented somewhere or tracked somewhere or shared in some way, so that others that come along after you, maybe in other divisions or other teams, are able to take what's learned and actually apply the learning and benefit from that as well. When we think about learning from others, I think that it's very interesting. I ran a webinar last year for the CIO Executive Council, and when I asked them about what they were doing in terms of responding to in particular, for me, it was really about how they were applying Agile to their governance functions. In some organisations, they're referred to as PMOs, others it might be portfolio functions, EPMO, regardless of what you're calling it. I referred this question to them. I said to them, how are you responding to the increase and uptake of Agile that's increasing globally, I think more than I've ever seen it in the last few years. And when they were asked about what was happening with their existing governance functions, 33% of the CIOs that were on this webinar said that they're actually dissolving their governance functions.
Right, okay.
17% said they were ignoring the problem and just hoping it went away, and 50% said they were resizing, where each in effect actually meant downsizing, which for those on the call that are in the governance space, in the PMO space, the space that sort of helps to support delivery, they're really stark statistics, because they actually impact people's roles and how we do things. And I think this goes back to the lack of awareness and understanding. And so I think what these CIOs, for example, were told is they need to think about how they change the application of Agile to their governance functions in a way that suits the situation, even if that is maybe resizing their functions, etc. So I think that was very, very surprising to hear from them around their approach. But I think for those ignoring it, it was more a lack of understanding and awareness of what Agile means to them.
Okay.
So now when we think about learning from others, so I really wanted to just briefly talk you through some learnings of mistakes that have happened in other organisations and industries through some research over the last 6 to 12 months. One organisation, for example, in the telco space, I spoke with a company in Ireland in telco space who were told that they needed to go down the Agile path, and so they had decided that they would do that and decided to go through a number of different iterations to get to what they thought was Agile, but they hadn't really spent the time or the foresight around how that would interact with other functions within the organisation. So one of the divisions actually just decided they were going to do that. And as we know, Agile is about business agility. It's about holistic application of Agile in terms of being able to be top down, bottom up, as I mentioned earlier. And so they rigidly applied a methodology that was conceived elsewhere. And in this particular instance, as a result of taking something that worked somewhere else and trying to cookie cutter that into their organisation, they actually were unable to be successful in this regard. And what they ended up doing is after 12 months, they actually shut down the function. Agile in this organisation got a bad name, and they went back to their traditional ways of working and, waterfall governance, and just really completely were burnt by that experience.
Right, okay.
So that was, definitely something that was not recommended. So don't apply a methodology conceived elsewhere. Another example is a banking organisation who decided to go full speed ahead with Agile and micromanage the change. Now, Agile is all about collaboration and teams working together and co-designing and using principles and working in different teams to actually implement change and get the benefits and drive value and working smarter, not harder. And unfortunately for this organisation, they tried to micromanage the change by being very prescriptive and following a prescriptive method of way that they needed to work. That unfortunately resulted in a number of different teams and of people leaving over a period of 2 to 3 years. So micromanaging the change doesn't give people in the change, those that are experiencing the change, the opportunity to contribute and actually be part of that. So I think that would be another learning along the way to go through in terms of that experience. Did you want to talk through any examples, Jenny, that you might have heard of in the UK side of things that you might have seen?
Oh, there's so many, in all honesty. I'm just a little bit aware of the time, in all honesty, because we've got some questions building up as well. But I know, obviously, we've got to bring Marcus in as well to the call. So I reiterate, really, your points. Micromanaging is wrong. Assessing the whole of your team and putting them through some sort of profile assessing. And that's what I've heard of over here, which was just brought the whole good feeling in the team. It's completely down to the bottom, and everyone's not very happy about it at all. There's different ways of doing it. At the end of the day, it's all about the culture. It's all about, your team are your best asset in your in the organization. It's all about the people. So you just need to be mindful, really. I think that's what really we need to hit on here. You need to be really mindful that change is people react to change in so many different ways. Some people accept it, no problem at all, but they've got to be able to see the end goal. They've got to see the benefits for them, for everybody to sort of jump on that journey and feel comfortable with that journey. And there's so many ways that you can do that to alleviate those big challenges that organizations can face, because if they do it wrong, and if they treat their people more like numbers, I guess, rather than people that have feelings, then that's where it all goes incredibly wrong. People are your biggest asset. And I mean, yeah, everybody really knows that in business. It comes down to the people, and you've got to treat them right through a process of transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't stress everything you've said. I agree 100%. But you're right. We are running short on time. So at this point, I want to introduce Marcus. Are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Beautiful. So I'll just introduce Marcus. So Marcus Kirsch is a .com veteran with about 2 decades of experience, award-winning international integrated strategy experience in the technology space. He's also a Royal College of Art alumni and an ex-MIT Europe researcher. He's accumulated an eclectic mix of projects in the area of education, luxury, automotive, advertising, and others. Current clients include companies like BMW, Nissan, Guide Dogs, to name a few. Marcus has spent a long time global consulting basis around startups and innovation, and specialises in design thinking, innovation and transformation. So I'm going to pass over to Marcus, who welcome and thank you for sharing our case study with us.
Yes, hello, and thank you for inviting me. So yeah, let me give you a little bit more backdrop. Thanks for the introduction. So I would say, just to put that a little bit into context. So design thinking, I'm coming more from a design background, but I used to work in development as well. So I'm sort of always been representing both worlds, so to speak, both everything from strategy creation to production. And I'm now, for the last couple of years, been finding myself more and more in projects that are very transformation by nature, design thinking driven, and obviously are including quite a lot of agile use. So the project I want to talk about today is one I did over last year, or started actually back in November the year before, 17. And the project was for a very big telco with thousands of engineers and other staff. And the aim was to significantly transform their IT department, the IT shop in essence. So the ambition here was that they very much realized that they are very siloed, and they need to be a bit more modern in the way they work and the way they offer anything they do. Now, because their IT shop supplies 5 other big parts of the business, or 5 other businesses, the challenge here was, of course, to really infuse a cultural change, and while we're infusing a cultural change, to be able to create self-organizing and outcome-based teams that we could apply, themselves to various business challenges across the business and scale those very fast. So not a small task if you're given sort of the initial 6 months we had, and then that was extended for another 6 months because we could see growth and that needed further push towards really making most of that growth already. So where best do I start in terms of how we approach that? I think maybe some of the points to make was that the way we brought this to the business was a very much kind of learning by doing approach. So as much as we had small workshops to give people sort of the top line of what this new thing is and what the tools are, I think it was easy and at times uncomfortable, but actually in the end worked amazingly well, was to really bring the teams that we would spin up and that we would guide through the new processes right onto a new project. So they weren't doing a mock project and kind of a longer week workshop of sorts. It was actually directly going, okay, we're actually having a list of problems that we want to tackle and improve. And you're actually going to be the team working on this, and you're going to use Agile, you're going to use design thinking, and you will do this. Not to worry, we have guides for each team, but essentially you're doing the real stuff. This is not just for test. And then what we thought is that if we're running people through too many workshops and then weeks later they get into an actual project, they are in a different context, the learnings will feel different and they might not be applied in the right way. Actually doing it on a real project was quite a bit of a fire test for a lot, but we saw things to really click in people's heads around about 6 weeks into each of those projects. Now, in terms of scale, we started with initially 3 pilots, so 3 pilot services we would create with 3 teams, and then we scaled this further up to 11 and 14. By the time I was leaving last year, when we handed over, we had 11 in flight, and we had another 20 to 30 in the pipeline in order to create new teams over the next 2 years. Now, what was probably really interesting to see, apart from the fact that sort of it started to click around 6 weeks into each of the teams, somewhere a bit earlier, some a bit later, was that I think pretty much on all of those teams and projects, we applied it a little bit differently. One aspect of that was because just the nature of the team, they were coming from different departments. A lot of them were remote, so we had over teams in India, we had teams over in Glasgow, some in London, some were split between locations. So in each of the cases, we had to essentially work around some of the limitations and some of the challenges that were given by where the teams were coming from. And that was okay, actually. People were in the beginning going, oh, can we do this here? Can we do this, you know, over video? Does a stand-up work like that if everyone has to dial in, or does everyone need to be present? And we just applied different variations. Sometimes where we had people come in once a month, so that still got face-to-face time, and sometimes it actually started working quite well to be just remote. And what that led to after about the first 3 pilots was actually we started to see in the pilots that went live and in the other ones that were on flight, that we started to really build up a library of variations of how we could apply the process, how people would learn, and how people would also help each other. So I think governance came up quite a bit, and the horizontal approach, and it was nice to see Fatimah bringing up the slide with Tim Carmichael, who were interviewed for book I'm writing on agility and design and business, is that horizontal is really the thing that starts to shine through when you're saying, well, we're all trying to, in modern days, trying to solve wicked problems, which by nature are constantly changing and evolving problems. So the horizontal approach to have teams that are quite supported or need to be really supported by various different aspects of the business also essentially, I think, pretty much always need to be able to govern themselves to a much larger extent than we were used to. And that is another aspect that quite getting used to for a company, to shift that governance, to sometimes eradicate it. And sometimes you see it that, the CIOs say that, as Fatima said, I remember quite a couple of years back, the CEO of P&G making a bigger speech, and in the speech you could see there was one notion he made was, we're getting rid of a lot of managers, right? There's a management layer that just is not working because it slows you down. If you self-manage, that actually really, really works. Now, apart from design thinking tools and agile processes, the third pillar probably that we had to get into the teams that was also quite a learning curve was that they can self-govern. I think the biggest aspect of that in this case was probably that they can build their own business cases, which they normally never used to, right? So you have a department, they're already supposed to know what they're doing, and basically they needed to start really looking at more the financial aspects, or actually the business strategy. They need to be a bit aware of that, and this is all good. It was unusual for them to get comfortable with that, but actually once they got to know it, their project improved quite a bit, because suddenly there was a different purpose to what they were doing, right? They were self-governing. They would understand better of what they're bringing to the business and why. They would understand sometimes top-down decisions or senior management decision much better, because they got more closer to it, and the whole thing started to more flatten out and become a bit more horizontal. So lots of different things, and I think I don't know what trying to compress a whole years of work here into 5 minutes, but I think in the end it was great to see that minds can shift, and coming out of the most unusual areas. We had really teams that were quite averse in the beginning, but after a couple of weeks, suddenly when it clicked, they saw the insights, they saw how it actually worked, they saw how Agile can really de-risk a process and a development cycle. And we saw 180 degrees turnarounds. And I have to say, we saw all sorts of variations of how people align to it. But what we left when we left the company, left there, I think, is pretty much a brand new community of practitioners that work differently, lots of teams, through a lot of comms, activities, events, and so on. We got hundreds of more people involved in there, up to, I think in the end there was about, over 4,000 people that we really touched and connected with. Like, this is Agile, here's some tools, use them, try them, here's some things you can try, because we started towards the end of my engagement with the project to really automate some of those learnings, because obviously having guides on each team is not scalable. So we started to automate some of the learnings and educational elements to it. And it was really great to see that it started to really grow and caused a lot of interest from other areas of the business, because they saw how successful we were with the teams that we had. And the teams themselves became amazingly great representatives for a different kind of thinking, different kind of working, because the way they really engaged with it, learning by doing. They had something to show for once some of the projects went live, and it was overall a very satisfying, complex, big project with lots of learnings and a lot of variation. I think is a good thing to say and a good takeout, because every project was pretty much a little bit different. They all would agree that they're doing the same thing, but at the same time, they would all sort of disagree or say, well, but we did this here, and we could cut off another week, or we did 2 weeks more, but therefore we saw this and we could do this.
Marcus, thank you.
Really
thank you for that. That's just fantastic. No, we really, really appreciate your time. I'm just mindful of the time, I guess, but to actually go over that in such detail that you've done, we really, really appreciate it. And the learnings that came from that, I think, are really, really good. I mean, what I would ask is if you could write that up for us a little bit, and we could obviously send that out in a little bit more detail, maybe, out in the follow-up email.
Writing one book.
Well, there you go. We can't quite send the whole book out, but yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it? But just a preview of that or something would be great to send out in the follow-up email that everyone's going to be receiving on the after when I send out the recording to everybody. But I think that's a really, really great example. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing that with us. Fatima, over to you. What do you think? I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think I'm actually really happy with what you've shared. I think that you've described perfectly around how Agile was applied to the situation at hand. You quite clearly demonstrated the way that collaboration was done, and that how an initial foresight was given around what the end goals were, what the vision was of where you were trying to go. So I think that that's all really helpful, and I'm looking forward to reading the more detailed case study as well.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I mean, both of you please stay there because we have received some questions from our 100 or so people that are listening today. And obviously we had even more than that, obviously register. So what we're actually going to do is if we can go through some questions now. We've had a question in from, let's see. Okay, I think it's Anne. We've just started a government organisation. I've just started at a government organisation whose IT maturity is low. We deliver with a combination of waterfall and agile. We have a reputation of being slow and expensive. If we only focused on a critical few agile principles, which ones would you recommend for the biggest impact and enable a scalable step change? Well, thank you for that question. That's a great question. Fatima, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. I can definitely answer that because I've experienced something similar. I would highly recommend that the ones that you start with would be some form of a Kanban wall. Now, they have different names, but effectively it's a visual representation of what your function is working on at any point in time. So when someone comes along and says, I need, all these additional things to be done, you can have a transparent, open conversation with what the workload is for the current team, because it might not be a large team, and then actually reprioritize things on that wall together collaboratively to enable you to get some feedback, direct feedback, and I think that would be one of them. And the second one I would say would be stand-up. So having a daily checkpoint with the key people involved, I think would be really helpful for them to get awareness. That would be something you could do at the Kanban wall. And then the third one is I would suggest you set up a working group with people that are excited by the change, and it might only be 5 or 6 people. They can be changed every couple of months, and actually bring them along to help co-design that future.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And with that as well, that whole culture will develop, won't it? Because if you have those daily stand-ups, the culture just eases because you've got that trust and transparency happening across the board, really, haven't you?
It pays in dividends.
It really does pay in dividends. Sorry, that question came in from Pamela. So thank you, Pamela. I appreciate the question. There's a few more questions coming through, but I'm very mindful now of time. So what we're actually going to do, if my guests are happy with that, is what we'll actually do is we'll answer some more of these questions on after the webinar, and I'll send them out to you as in the follow-up email. We've also got a white paper that's going to be going out in the follow-up email as well, haven't we, Fatima?
Yes, very excited. It's been about a year in the making, and we have interviewed people across multiple countries, and really excited to share some insights on evolving governance in an agile way.
Brilliant. So not only have we got the white paper, we've got the case study, and we've also got the questions, and obviously also the recording that you can come back to time and time again for reference. So I think it's time to say thank you. Thank you so much for Fatima for joining us today, and also to Marcus for sharing such an insightful case study. We really, really do appreciate your time.
Beautiful. We're very happy to be on board. Thanks again to yourself, Jenny, and to Marcus as well, and everyone listening today.
And Marcus, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Thank you very much, and thank you all, everyone who took the time to join.
No problem at all. Like I said, we will get this recording on our website as soon as possible, so obviously people can refer to it for reference. I've just got enough time to tell you that over in London we have the Agile Business Conference that's going to be happening on the 25th and 26th of September. The title and the theme really for this year is the case for business agility. I think we've kind of answered that really in our webinar, haven't we? The case for business agility and the importance of it. But that's all going to be discussed. We're going to be looking at it with practitioners, executives and thought leaders. So if you're free and if you're in London, please do come along and join us. There's some great discount structures that's happening currently. The super early bird is currently on, and also if you're a member of the consortium, you also get additional discounts there as well. So thank you again to my guests, Fatima and Marcus. Thank you for joining us and for giving us, like I said, such insights into situational agility. I think we've really broken the silos, and if anyone's got any further questions, then please send them through to us. But from now, from me, Jenny Bailey, thank you again, and we'll be in touch with you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.